Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our first spring lecture. My name is Eric Beerbaum, and I serve as the director of the Edmund and Lily Soffer Center for Ethics. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Rachel Buchak and to welcome her to the center today. Lara, pardon me. I'll just start over. Professor Buchak is one of the most influential philosophers working at the intersection of decision theory, epistemology, and practical reason. In Risk and Rationality, she offers a powerful alternative to a familiar idea that rationality always yields a unique, correct, and uniform attitude towards risk. Her work shows with remarkable precision the serious rational agency can make room for different risk postures without giving up the store. And she works from decision theory, rational choice theory, and her own elegant formal results. And she arrives at a striking conclusion that will be part of our argument today, that faith can, in some cases, be rational. Her key move is to treat faith not as believing too hard, but committing under uncertainty in a certain kind of way, which she'll describe. In one of my favorite passages in her work, she engages with Downton Abbey, and Anna and Bates, if you know these two. Anna has abundant evidence that Bates is a good man. Bates is under investigation for murder. Should she marry him now or wait for the verdict? Professor Buchak's framework suggests marry him if your evidence is deep and the investigation is not conclusive, and if postponing the decision is costly, marry him. That's at least my interpretation. I'll make sure I'm not getting you wrong there. Exactly. This is a kind of rational faith, and I find it both formally compelling and also excellent television. The Soffer Center for Ethics is launching a podcast with Eve Driver on In Good Faith, and everything she's talking about today speaks to our initiative on disagreement of various forms. In one final paper, I want to draw your attention to faithful response to disagreement. Professor Buchak argues that disagreement from an epistemic peer may rationally require lowering one's credence, but not require abandoning belief. And that distinction maps on to the Center's Civil Disagreement Initiative in fairly direct ways. How do we sustain principled conviction while preserving humility, dialogue, and mutual answerability? Today's lecture, Faith, Commitment, and Belief, could not be better time for many conversations all of us are having, and when we're going to pursue when conviction runs ahead of belief in various ways. So please warmly join me in welcoming Professor Buchak. Thank you so much.
Right. Mike, good? You can hear me? All right. Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that welcome. So my talk today is going to have three parts. First, I'm going to talk about what it means to have faith in something, religious faith or mundane faith. Second, I'm going to talk about when is it rational to have faith in the sense I describe, because I think sometimes it is rational to have faith and sometimes it's not. It's worth knowing when, what's the good case, what's the bad case. And finally, I'm going to apply my view to three phenomena. Eric already mentioned the first one, disagreeing with a peer who seems sort of equally good at assessing the evidence as you are. The second phenomenon is the rationality of being part of a tradition or a paradigm. And the third question is when and why it's rational to defer to an authority rather than our own reason. Okay, so let's get started. So I think that mundane faith and religious faith are the same attitude. They just have different content. One has mundane content, one has religious content. There are lots of examples in which we use the locution having faith. So I have faith in your abilities. He has faith that his spouse won't cheat on him. I have faith in you. He has faith that you'll keep his secret. There are also religious cases of this locution. I have faith that God exists, maybe, or I have faith in God's goodness. There are also more specific religious claims that within particular traditions, people are supposed to have faith in. For example, Abraham has faith that his descendants will be greater than the number of the stars. Moses has faith that God will lead his people out of Egypt. St. Paul and maybe Christians today have faith that Jesus was raised from the dead. Maybe adherents to Islam today have faith that the Quran is authoritative. So there are two kinds of locutions that we use. There's faith in and faith that. I'm going to be giving you a theory of faith that something is the case or faith that some claim is true. And the goal here is an account of faith and when and why it's rational. Because again, we want to separate the good cases of this attitude from the bad cases, because faith isn't always good or bad. We want to know what makes a difference. So I call my account the risky commitment account of propositional faith. First, I want you to notice that only certain claims are candidates for faith in the first place. So a claim is only a candidate for faith if two conditions hold. First, you care that it holds, and moreover, you want it to hold, or you have some positive attitude towards it holding. For example, compare, I have faith that you'll quit vaping. That sounds pretty good. I have faith that you'll continue vaping. That sounds bad. It doesn't sound like something I would say. And it's not because I doubt your ability to continue vaping or something like that. It's something I think is bad that I don't want. Second, in order to be a candidate for faith, you need to be uncertain that the claim holds on the basis of your evidence alone. Your evidence has to leave it open that the claim is false. So for example, I have faith that 2 + 2 = 4. That sounds kind of strange. In fact, if you try to make it work at all, it brings to mind contexts in which it's possible that that might not be true for some reason. So you need, in order for a claim to be a candidate for faith, you need to care that it holds and be uncertain on the basis of your evidence alone. This means that some good candidates for faith are claims about what other people will do. That's something you often care about and just can't be fully certain of on the basis of your evidence alone. People have free will. They can do what they want. Claims about what you should do in a tricky situation, maybe especially a tricky moral situation. Claims about who to listen to, who to trust. Claims about what's out there in the universe. For example, is there a God, or which religion, if any, is true. Maybe claims about what will happen, or claims based on other people's authority. Okay, so those are claims that are candidates for faith. So secondly, what does it mean to have faith in one of these claims? Well, notice that faith is tied to action. To have faith in a claim means to be willing to take a risk on that claim. So if I have faith that you're good at keeping secrets, I might tell you my secret, and it's a risk to tell you a secret. If you do keep it, that's good. If you don't keep it, that's bad. Dedicating your life to following the commands of some religion is a risk. If the religion is true, that's great. If the religion is not true, not so good. It's a risk for Moses to leave Egypt to seek the promised land, and so forth. So you have a higher degree of faith in a claim to the extent that you're willing to take bigger and more risks on the claim. But not every case of risk-taking is an act of faith. After all, I could just be playing poker, taking some appropriate risks and not taking others. It doesn't seem like that enterprise involves faith at all. So faith involves something further. Faith involves a commitment. What's a commitment? Well, it's something that you make a decision to do, and it's something that you don't give up lightly. So it's something you stop thinking about and say, okay, I'm gonna do that. And it's something that even if it looks like maybe this was a bad idea for some reasons, you don't automatically give it up. So more specifically, here's my account. I claim that you have faith in some claim that's a candidate for faith if 2 conditions hold. First, you're willing to take a risk on that claim without looking for additional evidence. And second, you're willing to continue to take a risk even when you receive evidence against the claim. So again, the first condition says you stop thinking about what you do and act. For example, telling your secrets to a friend is taking a risk on the claim that she will keep them. Again, you gain something if she keeps the secrets, you lose something if she doesn't. The first condition says that whether you have faith in this claim is a matter of whether you're willing to tell your friend your secrets without first double checking with somebody else, asking a mutual friend is this friend really trustworthy? You gotta just tell your friend the secrets. Or in the example Eric gave in the beginning, you just marry the guy. You can't wait for the results of the investigation to say if he's innocent or not. The second condition says that you're committed. You're resilient to evidence in a certain kind of sense. Your mind won't be changed lightly. So in the case of secret keeping, if I have faith that my friend will keep my secrets, I will continue to tell him my secrets, even if some mutual friend comes along and says, look, this guy is not very good at keeping secrets. So even if I have evidence that this is a bad decision. Or to take a religious example, Moses says the story has interacted with God personally. He has ample reason to believe that God is trustworthy and cares about his people. God has told him to journey out of Egypt with his people. So Moses has 2 choices. He could embark on the journey, the risky act, or he could stay in Egypt, the safe act. Moses had faith that God would lead his people to the promised land. So he embarked on the journey without first verifying that it would be successful. And in fact, he stood firm even in the face of a lot of counter evidence. So if you know the story, Pharaoh says he can take his people and go, and then Pharaoh changes his mind, and then he says God sends a plague, and then he says you can go again, and then he changes his mind, and then there's another plague, et cetera, et cetera. So throughout this whole time, Moses is receiving evidence in favor, followed by evidence against the thought that this journey will be successful. Nonetheless, he sticks with it. Okay. So your faith is stronger to the extent that you're willing to take greater risks, as I already mentioned. Your faith is also stronger to the extent that you're resilient to more evidence. Okay, so that's my account of what it is to have faith in some claim. Now we want to know, is this attitude rational? Is it good to have? We usually think, maybe not. So we usually think I should make sure to have all the information before I act. We usually think maybe it's a mistake to act without gathering all the available evidence. We usually think maybe it's a sign of a good intellectual disposition to change my mind when new facts come to light. So maybe faith seems like obstinate in some sense. It's like not responding to the evidence enough. So is faith, in the sense I've outlined here, ever a good idea? And my claim is going to be that yes, sometimes faith is rational. Sometimes faith is good to have, helps you carry out your life projects, helps you get what you want or what's good. Other times, faith in this sense is bad to have. It keeps you from getting what you want or what's good. And my goal, again, is to say, when is faith good and when is faith bad from the perspective of your evidence? Now, of course, there's a sense in which faith is good if the claim is true and bad if the claim is false. But saying have faith in true claims is like not very followable advice. It's like saying buy low, sell high. Great, you don't have enough information to do that. So we want to know from your perspective, given your evidence, what should you do? When should you have faith in something and when should you refrain from having faith in something? And in particular, if you have faith in a claim, when and why would it be a good idea to act on this claim without gathering more evidence? And when and why would it be a good idea to stick with your plan even when you acquire some evidence against the claim? And when and why, if ever, would it be a good idea to drop your faith? Because you could start by having faith in a claim, and it might at some point be a good idea to let go of that faith. Okay, so I'm going to say some things about how philosophers in the tradition I'm working in think about rationality, but just want to note at the outset that there's a sort of standard picture of intellectual and active life that I'm arguing against. And that picture is something like, at every moment, you should decide what to do. So like, I should come into the classroom free of any beliefs I had beforehand and just evaluate the evidence that we all share and then leave with the beliefs that are like exactly given to me by that evidence. Or at every moment, I shouldn't kind of think about my past commitments to action. I should think, what would it be good for me to do now? So that's like the picture I'm going to be arguing against. But first, let me say a little about how philosophers are thinking about rationality. So there are two notions here, epistemic rationality and practical rationality. Epistemic rationality is like rationality in your beliefs, rationality in how you assess evidence, and practical rationality is rationality in how you act. So many philosophers, myself included, like to think of your assessment of the evidence as represented by what we call credences or subjective probabilities. So these behave just like the kind of probabilities you might be familiar with from like games of chance. They're just measures of how much evidence you have in favor of the thing. So if I say like, I have credence 0.5 that this claim is true, that means my evidence sort of makes it like, what's the number I gave? 0.95? Yeah, my evidence makes it 0.95. My evidence makes it 95% likely that the thing is true. Okay, maybe you could think of these as degrees of confidence, something like that. Notice just looking at my definition doesn't say anything about your evidence. So faith does not require you to do anything special with your evidence. It doesn't require you to say like, bump up the credence you think your evidence suggests. It doesn't require you to say like, well, on the basis of the evidence, I'm 0.7 sure of this. Instead, I'm going to be 0.9 or 1. It says nothing of that sort. It simply means that your decisions won't depend on what new evidence comes in. So for example, when the Pharaoh says to Moses, "I won't let your people go," Moses should become less confident that his journey out of Egypt will be successful. He has evidence against the claim that he'll be able to leave Egypt with his people. Nonetheless, my definition says he should act, but it does not say he should assess the evidence in any sort of non-standard way. So there's no sense in which faith goes against epistemic rationality. So let's talk about practical rationality. Practical rationality is rationality in what you do. To simplify a bit, many philosophers think that under risk, what you should do is maximize expected utility. The basic idea here, we don't have to sort of go into the formalism here, but the basic idea is that when you don't know what's true, the possibilities should count towards evaluation of your action in proportion to how likely they are. So you don't know if it's going to rain or not. Should you bring an umbrella? Well, to the extent that you think rain is more likely, or to the extent that you have more evidence that it will rain, that counts more in favor of bringing your umbrella. Okay, so there's sort of a formal model behind all of this that has probabilities and utilities. I'm not going to mention it at all. I'm just going to be talking in terms of the informal ideas behind it. I'm happy to talk about it if you want, but I actually kind of think that the point of formal theories in philosophy anyway is to make things precise in order to illuminate facts in the messy real world. So if we've actually captured the phenomenon correctly, then like in the end, we don't need the formal apparatus because we'll just be able to say the facts that it illuminates. That's what I'm trying to do here. Okay, so that's practical rationality. Question, when is it practically rational to take a risk without looking for more evidence? And when is it rational to then stick with a risk, even if the evidence makes it no longer seem like a good idea? And just a little caveat when we say, like, when is it rational to do this? We're not concerned with the benefits of being in a certain belief state. Like, we're not considering the idea of, like, you know, it might be nice for you to believe that your friend is good at keeping secrets, even if they're terrible. Well, we're only considering the benefits that occur if the claim is really true. So the benefits of having faith that your friend is a good secret keeper are only realized in the state in which your friend actually keeps your secrets. Okay. So when and why is it practically rational to adopt faith? So imagine you are deciding between a risky act and a safe act. And maybe you can kind of come up with an example in your own mind. Like what's some decision you're making or have made where like one of the options was kind of risky and based on some claim, and the other option was safe. So maybe taking a job that might not pan out or starting a safe but kind of boring career. Maybe marrying some particular person or breaking up. Maybe joining some religious tradition or remaining uncommitted. Maybe telling a secret to a friend or keeping it to yourself. And again, the example of Moses, leaving Egypt versus staying. So now imagine that right now, the probability that the risky act would be a good choice is high enough that you should go for it. If your only two choices are doing the thing and giving up on it forever. So you're actually sure enough that you could succeed at the risky career, that if your only choice was do it now or lose it forever, you should go for it. If you would have to give up on being with a person forever, and then you're sure enough that they would be a good spouse, that you should marry them rather than break up with them. Okay. But now imagine there's a third option, which is this. Wait until you get more evidence and then decide. So maybe explore a bunch of career options. Maybe ask people who have the career, like, do they like it? What does it take to succeed? Maybe keep dating the person. Maybe live together and figure out if you like it. Maybe keep attending the religious services without joining. So question, if you're in this situation, when is it good to just go for the risky option? And when is it good to instead wait and gather more evidence? And what makes it the case that like this thing is better than this thing, or vice versa? And because we're going to see, to have faith is just to choose the risky option rather than to amass more evidence before you decide. Okay. So the basic idea here is that there are benefits to committing And there are also benefits to letting your act instead be based on additional evidence. These benefits, along with the likelihood of being in the case in which they occur, weigh against each other to determine which course of action is better overall. All right, I'll mention the first case. It's kind of a boring case, but just for completeness. So the first case is the case in which negative evidence would lower your credence, but the risky act still seems better even on your new credence. It's still worth taking the risk. So let's say, for example, some mutual friend tells me my friend is a gossip, but this mutual friend is like totally unreliable anyway. They haven't changed my probability enough to want me to change my action. So in this case, there are no benefits of gathering the new evidence. You're just going to do the same thing anyway. And there might be cost to postponing the decision. For example, maybe I have to wait longer to unburden myself to a friend. In this case, commitment is permissible. So it's permissible to have faith, and it's required for you to have faith if there are costs to postponing the decision. So maybe the costs are not getting started on the career, not enjoying your marriage as soon as you might, in the case of Moses, having his people stay enslaved in Egypt. Now, I say that's kind of a boring case because the evidence you're considering isn't going to change your act anyway. This more interesting case is the second case. That's the case in which negative evidence would lower your credence or probability to the point that taking a risk would no longer be a good idea. So in this case, if you got the negative evidence, you would do the safe act instead. So if a third party says your friend is really a gossip, that will move my probability in her trustworthiness low enough that it will no longer be a good idea for me to tell her the secret. And that could be good, or it could be bad. It could be good if the claim that I was thinking of taking a risk on is in fact false. If my friend was in fact going to go blab my secret, then I'm talked out of taking a bad risk. On the other hand, it's bad if the claim that I was going to take a risk on is in fact true. I'm talked out of taking a risk that would have been better for me. Okay, so those are kind of the two things that weigh against each other. And there's like a third thing, which is that if you get positive evidence as you look for evidence, so you ask a third party and they're like, your friend's totally trustworthy, tell her your secret, then you will again bear the cost of postponing the decision. So there's kind of one benefit of looking for more evidence before you decide, and that's that you could get talked out of a risk that would have been a bad risk to take. There's also some benefits of just committing now and not looking at the future evidence or not letting your decision be based on the other evidence. And that's that you will not be if the risk is a good risk, you won't be talked out of taking it, and there are benefits to acting now rather than later. Okay, and how these benefits weigh against each other is going to depend on the probabilities of each. So what we can then conclude, so basically these conditions 1 and 2 are things that say when the upsides of committing now rather than looking for evidence have enough probability that they outweigh the upsides of instead looking for evidence before acting. Here are the conditions. First, you already have a high credence or probability in the proposition in question. You already have a lot of evidence that your friend is a good secret keeper. You already have a lot of evidence that this person would be a good spouse. Moses already has a lot of evidence that his journey out of Egypt will be successful. Second, counter evidence, if you get it, won't be conclusive. So if a third party says, hey, your friend is not a good secret keeper, even if that will lower my probability that the friend is a good secret keeper, it won't be conclusive. Now I'm going to be in this 50-50 state where maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but I don't want to take the risk. And so those are the sort of epistemic conditions. And third, there are costs to postponing the decision. And the way that's going to figure in is basically that's going to make you, the higher the cost of postponing the decision, the less decisive your initial evidence is going to need to be to do the thing. Okay. So the exact values of those three conditions depend on the stakes, but that's the basic idea. If you already have a lot of evidence for the thing, for the risk you're about to take, if future evidence will put you in a state where you no longer want to take the risk, but it nonetheless might have been a good idea. There's like a high enough chance that it might have been a good idea. And if there are costs to not acting now, then faith is going to be rationally required. You're going to have to make the commitment to the thing now rather than look for more evidence. Okay. So that's sort of about the initial step, which is like making a faith commitment. I'm going to commit. I'm not going to look for more evidence. I'm going to commit to the thing. But what should you think when you find yourself in the state in which you do receive counter evidence? Because remember, I mentioned that upon receiving counter evidence, your probabilities are going to be not high enough in order for you to do the action. You're going to be distressed that you made the commitment. I made plans to tell my friend my secret at 8 p.m. tonight, and now I got this evidence that they're not a good secret keeper. Like, I wish I hadn't made those plans. How should we think about this? Okay. Here's the way I like to think about this. There's sort of two policies that we might adopt for acting over time. One policy is we might choose and act according to our evidence at a time. Or we might choose and act according to a committed long-term plan, even though at certain times that plan is not going to be the one that I wish I had made. And notice that adopting this first policy, acting according to whatever perspective you have at the time, is going to rule out completing certain long-term projects. So, for example, if Moses only journeys to the promised land when he thinks he's going to be successful, then he's not going to make it. Because the way he encounters the evidence is like, all right, God told me to do this, seems like a good idea, marshal my people, it's got a high probability, and then Pharaoh says no. So rationally, his probability drops. So then if he was acting according to this do what's rational at the time policy, he would then go home. And then Pharaoh says, okay, never mind, you can go. And then his evidence goes up again. So he's like, great, here I go. And then Pharaoh says no. Okay, I'm gonna stop and go home. So like if Moses adopts this do what is rational at a time policy, he's never gonna leave Egypt. So there are certain kinds of claims where they undergird our important life-term projects. They require commitment, action over time, and our evidence for them is the kind of thing that by its very nature sort of goes up and down. Now, if one of these claims is true, then the only way to sort of carry out the best plan to carry out, if it's true, is to sometimes be willing to stick with your past commitments rather than rethink them at every time. So this is sort of like, we might say the function of commitments here, or the function of faith, is to keep us from being blown about by the changing winds of evidence, or from dithering, or from becoming unsteady. Now, as I've said before, faith doesn't say that you should do anything special with your credences or probabilities. So the individual who receives counter evidence should, in fact, update his assessment of the evidence, but stick with his action. The result of this is that faith commitments will sometimes feel like a mistake. When Moses is leading his people and here comes Pharaoh's army, that's going to feel like a mistake. When you're about to tell your friend a secret, but you've just received some evidence that's not that trustworthy, it's going to feel like a mistake. But that's precisely when faith commitments are operative and helpful, because they help Moses get out of Egypt. If, in fact, he can make the successful journey, they help me tell my friend my secret if she can, in fact, successfully complete it. And one upshot, too, is that the way in which each of us act isn't going to just be dependent on our evidence at a time, but it's going to depend on the commitments we came in with. So, for example, if you and I have equal assessments of our ability to become a doctor, but you're already in med school. You've already committed to acting on the claim, taking a risk on the claim that you would be a good doctor. Then you might have a reason to stay in medical school, even though I might have reason not to join medical school in the first place. Okay. So that's my view of faith. Requires two things: committing without looking for more evidence and sticking with it even if you get counter evidence. I think it's rational in certain epistemic situations. You've already got a lot of evidence. Future evidence or counter evidence that you've just gotten isn't conclusive, and there's some benefit to acting now or to committing, or some cost to giving up the commitment. So in the last part of the talk, I want to apply this to a couple questions about belief. And one thing, notice so far, I've been talking about two things. One is credences, which is your assessment of the evidence. That's just, 0.5, 0.9, these numbers that come on a scale. The other thing is action, what you do. What about belief? This thing that's off on that you either have or you don't. So I think action and commitment to action are central to faith. I don't think belief is sort of as central to faith, maybe as some people have thought, but we can say something about belief too, because we can think of belief itself as a kind of risky act. So think about belief. Belief has two goals. I want to believe true things. I also want to avoid believing false things. That means that believing something is a risk. So I could either believe some claim X, or I could be agnostic. If X is true, believing it is better, and if X is false, then remaining agnostic is better. Okay, so we can see how belief is a risky act. That's going to let it meet the conditions for being an object of faith. I can believe something by faith or on the basis of my faith. If it also is, meets those two conditions. So if I have what we might call a faith conviction, a belief that I adopt without looking for more evidence, and a belief that I stick with even in the face of counter evidence. Okay, so faith doesn't rest on belief, but you can believe by faith. It can be sort of an action that expresses your faith. Okay. So if we're going to, question, can convictions be rational? In other words, can they meet these three conditions I've just spelled out? Well, the first two are purely about your evidence. Surely we can meet those. It might be sometimes that you have a lot of evidence in favor of a claim and that evidence to the contrary won't be conclusive. But what about this third condition, that there can be benefits to adopting a belief in a committed kind of way, or cost to postponing the decision to adopt a belief? Well, I want to argue that there sometimes are costs to postponing belief or independent benefits to holding a belief in a committed or steady way. In other words, belief can meet this third condition for the rationality of faith. So two ways to argue for this, two kinds of ways in which committed beliefs can sometimes be better just than beliefs held in a more sort of flimsy way. First, notice that certain beliefs shape your reasoning and action. So when you're committed to a belief, you reason as if it's true. You cut down on the number of cognitive options that are live at any given moment. You ignore sources that reason from claims that are incompatible with the belief, freeing up your intellectual resources to use in other ways. So for example, think about a committed Christian, somebody who is committed to the belief that Christianity is true. They're going to stop paying attention to reasoning from the sources that reason as if atheism is true. They're going to spend more time reading and thinking about the Christian virtues and how to attain them, rather than thinking about what they should do ethically if atheism is true. And if in fact Christianity is true, that's going to be really good. That's going to be a source of, that's going to sort of give them a lot more true beliefs than if they had just remained agnostic. Or think about maybe a committed Democrat. The committed Democrat is going to cease to pay attention to libertarian sources. The committed Democrat is going to like dig into the debate surrounding which policies best care for the marginalized, rather than digging into the debate surrounding which policies are most consistent with liberty. If the core claims that the Democrat is committed to are the true ones, then he ends up with a lot more truth by being committed to this claim, by not being on the fence and sort of like hedging his bets, making sure he like reasons from each claim being true. We also collaborate with others who share our belief to discover new evidence, and we come up with larger theories on the basis of beliefs. So certain claims that are very central to our reasoning, that are like core claims from which we reason about other things, those are going to be the kinds of claims that if they're true, there are going to be benefits not to just believing them, but to believing them in a committed way, having convictions in favor of them. And it's going to be useful to commit to a claim that helps us reason in these ways, and expensive to drop this commitment, since you then have to start anew on all those tasks. So imagine, say, the Christian drops their beliefs and says, actually, I think Islam is the true religion. They're going to have to, they've spent all this time doing this one kind of reasoning. Now they're going to have to do this completely different and new and foreign kind of reasoning. So it's going to be expensive to drop the old claim. Okay, so that's one kind of way in which commitments to beliefs can be better than just having beliefs. Second, think about interpersonal relationships or community membership. Sometimes these things require not just belief, but steady belief. So interpersonal matters are a lot like this. For example, it's better to unwaveringly believe of a trustworthy friend that she is trustworthy. It's better for the relationship, rather than to like sometimes think she's trustworthy, sometimes not be sure, etc. Religious and moral views often involve an interpersonal element as well. Maybe it's better to unwaveringly believe that God loves you than it is to just sometimes believe that and sometimes believe he's indifferent. If others can predict your beliefs, you will end up able to coordinate in ways in which you couldn't otherwise. So if I'm committed to believing something and other people know it, they can rely on me to do certain things, which is going to make kinds of action possible that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Okay. So there's maybe more to say here, but hopefully I've gone some way to arguing that there are sometimes benefits to believing things in a committed way, so we can meet this condition 3 of when faith commitments are rational. And then if you also meet the epistemic conditions, then you can rationally have faith convictions. So you can rationally have faith that the core claims associated with being a Democrat are true, for example. Okay, and I want to use this idea, the idea that there are certain claims that you can rationally have faith in, to analyze 3 phenomena. So again, rationally have faith in claims means you can commit to them without looking for more evidence. And importantly for this last part, you can stick with your beliefs even if you get evidence to the contrary. Specifically, even if you get evidence such that you would not adopt the belief anew if you didn't already have it. Okay, first problem. And I gather you guys have been talking a lot about this problem this year at the Safra Center, so interested to hear what people have to say. It's a problem of peer disagreement, it's sometimes called. The question, what do you do when a person who is just as smart as you has a different opinion about something? This seems, unfortunately, to happen all the time in matters of morality, politics, and religion. So call the claims about which we have peer disagreement the disputed claims. Here are 3 views that all seem independently attractive, though unfortunately they seem to conflict. So first, frequency. It seems like there's widespread disagreement among peers about the disputed claims, whether those are claims in politics, religion, morality, name your favorite disputed claims, there's widespread disagreement about them. And it seems like we also want to accept humility. when an epistemic peer forms a very different opinion about a claim than I do, I ought to drastically alter my opinion. That's like what it is to be an epistemic peer. They're like also very smart. They've assessed the evidence. They come to a different conclusion. That should be evidence against my view. But third, tenacity. I ought to maintain my opinion about the disputed claims. So even if I disagree with someone, it seems like maybe I should still get to keep my beliefs. Why? Because not doing that seems sort of spineless, or like I have a life in which I'm committed to nothing. I believe nothing. That seems like a bad state to be in. Okay. So these three claims conflict, and there's sort of worries about denying each of them. Denying humility looks like maybe you're not fully appreciating the force of peer disagreement. Denying tenacity looks like spinelessness. It also looks like you're just never going to be able to get anything done. You like don't believe anything. But if we have faith in the disputed claims, so again, faith means committing, even if you get evidence such that the belief would no longer be rational if you were approaching it anew, then we can accept versions of all these claims. In particular, we can accept humility about the evidence. We can say, yeah, I encounter peer disagreement. My credence really should lower. But we can accept tenacity about belief. I can stick with my commitments even though I get counter evidence. Why? Because the disputed claims often meet the three conditions for the rationality of faith. So there are often claims about which I do take myself, antecedent to our disagreement, to have a lot of evidence. I've thought about this a lot. It seems like I have a lot of evidence for my view. But condition two, when I get countered evidence, namely when I encounter you disagreeing with me, my credence should drop. But it shouldn't drop to zero. This isn't conclusive evidence that I'm wrong. You might be wrong, I might be wrong. And third, for many of the important beliefs on which it would be bad to be spineless, there are typically benefits not just to believing, but also believing in a predictably steady way. These are all the disputed claims are often claims on which they're central claims to our theorizing about morality or politics or religion. Maybe they form part of my community membership. Maybe they're claims on which I base a lot of long-term projects. Maybe I take like important actions based on these claims. Okay, so that's my solution to the problem of disagreement. Humility about evidence, but tenacity about belief, and that's rational. Second phenomenon I want to talk about has to do with the role of belonging to a tradition or paradigm. So the phenomenon of paradigms and paradigm shift was first identified by philosophers of science like Thomas Kuhn, observing that science sometimes undergoes large-scale changes instead of progressing instrumentally. So we all have this received picture of science, maybe from our like 9th grade chemistry textbook that's like, oh, scientists test things, and if it's true, then they add it to the stock of beliefs, and if it's false, they don't add it. Kuhn says, that's true during normal science, but this other thing sometimes happens, which is that we go through large-scale revolutions where it kind of change all of our claims. So think about like, we used to have the phlogiston theory of combustion, where the world is full of phlogiston that plays a role in things being set on fire. And then we discovered the oxygen theory. And we sort of like dropped all the beliefs from that theory and got a new theory. Okay. It seems like the same pattern sometimes arises in individual epistemic life. So consider a person who grew up comfortably as a Christian for whom being an atheist was not a serious intellectual option, or a person who grew up comfortably as an atheist for whom being a Christian was not a serious intellectual option. They each might start with their core assumptions and try to build a theory of the world on the base of it, but they also might both encounter challenges to their view. Maybe the Christian encounters the problem of evil and he doesn't know what to do with it. Initially, they might be inclined to dismiss these challenges. And this is exactly what Kuhn says about science. So we notice some anomalies in our experimental data. Initially, we dismiss it. Maybe when they meet each other, they might initially convince themselves that the other is unreasonable or morally unserious or intellectually inferior, because the existence of the other is a challenge to their view. They might resolve into a renewed adherence to their own traditions, or instead they might both feel an increasing mismatch between their theory and lived experience, and when the buildup is too much, they might leave their tradition or convert to a new one. It's significant that this is often described as conversion and not merely a shift in beliefs. It's often felt as a significant break rather than part of an ordinary continuous process. Similar thing in morality and politics. Maybe we have a consequentialist and a deontologist that are each committed to entirely different theories of the world. They meet each other. They sort of feel each other to be counter-evidence to their view, and then they're either going to sort of dig in or change their view. Maybe a pro-choicer and a pro-lifer, maybe a Republican and a Democrat. They all see the world through a lens which they no longer feel the need to spend time justifying. So it's not as if every time the consequentialist gets out of bed, he's like, let me justify consequentialism to myself again. This is like just part of his background of how he lives his life, and he interprets the data in light of that. Okay, maybe there are interpersonal cases of this too. So maybe you might start off by viewing a friend or a spouse as trustworthy, kind, or good, but then confront evidence that they're not. You may initially ignore it completely, but later feel a buildup of evidence that you can't ignore. Some people who experience a breakup sort of describe it as like a gestalt shift from one way of seeing the world to another way of seeing the world. So call this general phenomenon that appears both in science and in individual life, adherence to a tradition and break from a tradition. This phenomenon has three features. First, recalcitrance. Adherence to a tradition respond dogmatically to anomalies or counter-evidence. So like the phlogiston theories makes more and more complex theories to account for the fact that things actually weigh less, not more, after you set them on fire. The Christian maybe makes theodicies, explanations of why God might allow evil that are more and more complex in response to this surprising data that there is evil in the world. Second feature of the phenomenon, called this gestalt. Adherence to different traditions can look at what is putatively the same evidence and draw different conclusions. And third, conversion. A break from the tradition appears sudden and discontinuous, a drastic response to built-up tension, rather than an ordinary belief shift or just adding a new belief to my stock of beliefs. Now, the standard story about these features is that they're all irrational, or at least irrational. You sort of look at this, like we're looking at the same evidence and we're considering different things. Doesn't that seem irrational or irrational? We're responding dogmatically to anomalies or counter-evidence. Dogmatically, that's like a bad word. It seems like we're being irrational. But with my view of faith and when it's rational, we can explain the familiar pattern and explain all three of these features as rational by showing that when an individual is committed to the core assumptions of a tradition, that is, when an individual rationally has faith in the core assumptions of a tradition, all three features follow. So notice again that we often meet the three conditions for the rationality of faith with respect to the core assumption of a tradition. So high initial credence. A tradition is generally an amalgamation of many thoughtful people's work, evidence gathering, and thinking with thoroughly tested ideas. So if you grew up in a religious tradition, it's natural and in fact fits with your evidence that you have high credence in this thing. You think it's very likely to be true. There are lots of these smart evidence gathering people like working on the tradition, making sure it matches the world. Second, inconclusiveness, encounters with other traditions or anomalies or thinking things through yourself. That's going to lower your probability, but again, it's not going to be conclusive. If I disagree with this tradition, if phlogiston theory can explain lots of things, but not the weight of oxygen, I'm not sure that it's false. I just have some evidence against it. And third, again, there are benefits to not just believing, but being committed to the core assumptions of a tradition. Again, it like helps me shape my reasoning, tells me what kind of evidence I should spend time gathering on, what are the tools for what are the right tools for gathering evidence, and so forth. So if I have faith in the core assumption of a tradition, all three of these phenomena will follow. So again, recalcitrance is basically just the condition of sticking with it even if you get counter evidence. Gestalt is just the fact that two people can come to the table with different convictions, look at the same evidence, even form the same credences or probabilities, and leave with different beliefs. And conversion is explained by the fact that your faith commitments will keep you going for a while. But if your evidence gets really low, then it's going to make sense to drop the faith commitments. And you're also going to feel like, wow, I didn't have evidence for this thing for a while. Because for a period, the only thing keeping you going was your commitment, not your evidence. Okay, so if we accept my view of faith, we can explain these familiar features of traditions and explain them as rational. I think I don't have time for the last thing, but I'll just mention, and I'll leave it as an exercise to the reader to figure out how is this rational on my view. So faith often gets associated with believing a person or believing an authority. Here's a kind of thing we could say. So one faith claim is when this authority says something, they're speaking the truth. Or when this authority tells me to do something, I should do it. If I have faith in that claim, then I'm going to be resilient to counter evidence. Here's one kind of counter evidence. I've thought through the matter myself, and I disagree with the authority. So in certain cases, namely when your faith in the authority meets the rationality conditions, it's actually going to be better or rational or more conducive to what you, more conducive to the good to defer to the authority rather than to your own reason. Okay, so that's my view of faith, when it's rational, and how it applies to these three, I think, interesting epistemic phenomenon. I'm very interested to hear your questions, so thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for a lecture so interesting. I'm worried everyone's going to have a question. But I thought, I want to start with an undergraduate for two reasons. One, Professor Buchak was an undergraduate here, distinguished undergraduate, and a common theme in a couple of your articles is the undergraduate who's having fits and starts, struggling.
That's right.
Maybe it's a thesis, maybe it's overall 4 years. And so I won't ask you whether that was you speaking to it, but I'd love to have one of our distinguished undergraduates speak to start. So yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for a great lecture. The content of your lecture brought to mind the work of Ryan Preston Roeder. Sorry? Oh, there's a microphone. Yeah. Thank you for your lecture. The idea of faith brought to mind the work of Ryan Preston Roeder and his work on faith in humanity. And he's claimed that perhaps not faith alone, but the expression of faith can serve as a proto-speech act. If I tell my friend, if my friend shares a secret with me and she then tells me, I have faith that you won't tell anyone, in a way that imposes on me a reason not to share her secret with others. And so I know that your lecture did not focus on the expression of faith, but I was wondering whether you see that as a reason to at least express faith, even though we might not be convicted on the truth of that assertion, me having faith in my friend, or me knowing that my friend won't share my secrets.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. A couple of thoughts in response to it. One, I do think, I mentioned that faith is the thing that keeps us going when, the going gets tough and our evidence isn't really, isn't as good as we want it to be. Maybe it can keep us going for in other less rational ways, when I'm waving for other less rational reasons, like, I want to leave Egypt, but it's really hard, so I don't have faith that I'm going to do it. One thing that expressions of faith in someone else can do is sort of shore up their faith when it's getting weak. So maybe that seems like a case of that. It's good for you to have faith in yourself. You're wavering on that, so I say, I have faith in you. Another thing it brought to mind is that expressions of faith have this other role, which is that I'm going to base my actions on full commitment that you'll do the thing I have faith that you'll do. So it's actually useful for you to know that. So I don't know if secret keeping is the best example here, but let's say, I don't know, I have faith that you'll pick me up at the airport. You said you would. I have faith that you would. Then you know that I'm not going to call a cab if you're running late because I have faith in you. And that helps us coordinate our actions together. So I think there is a role for that, and maybe those are two potential roles that expressing your faith in someone else can play. Thank you.
Victor.
Hi.
Enjoyed your talk.
Thanks.
There were parts of your talk that I found really persuasive. So the idea that making a decision or commitment can be practically rational because it allows you to fulfill long-term projects, including intellectual projects in the case of belief. But there was a couple of things I wasn't persuaded by in your talk. One of them was the idea that you could disconnect faith from belief. It seems to me that anytime you have faith in something, you believe that thing. It'd be very strange to say, I have faith that you're going to quit vaping, but I don't believe that you're going to. The other thing that I wasn't persuaded by is that it's epistemically rational to form beliefs in the way that you talk about, where they outrun evidence and are then resilient in the face of counter-evidence. Because it seems like even if they are good from the perspective of epistemic utility theory, they still violate epistemic norms. So for example, you might tell me, hey, Victor, believe that my shirt is red, even though I know you always lie about that sort of thing. And if you do, I'm going to let you have access to this archive, this Wittgenstein archive or something, where you can get all kinds of evidence for this project. It's like, well, I should probably do that if I can, but I'm not being rational. I'm not being epistemically rational. I believe in that. So, yeah, the connection with belief and whether this is rational in the case of.
Yeah, great. Both great questions. Thank you. So the disconnect of faith from belief, maybe I implied something too strong. What I meant to be saying is that faith isn't belief plus something else. There's this sort of like literature on faith that assumes faith like involves belief and then maybe something else. I think faith is a matter of action, but then we notice that belief too is a kind of action or risk. And so what I'm saying is that belief is based on faith, not the other way around. So that's all. I'm not saying they're disconnected or totally independent. The based on relation kind of goes in the other way than that many people think it does. The question of violating, like believing for practical reasons, I agree with you that I can't believe your shirt is red to get into to get to see a Wittgenstein archive and then have lots of true beliefs on the basis of that. But notice that's different from the case I'm mentioning here. There, like the belief about your shirt is like totally unrelated to the Wittgenstein beliefs. You just like give me some beliefs because I believe the thing. I'm saying something more like, I'm not sure of the color of your shirt. I've had good evidence that it's red. If I stick with that, even when it's hard, I'll like be able to like think about the exact shade. I'll be able to figure out the exact shade of it, something like that. So it's like, it is more, I mean, I do take the point, but it's not quite like the goodies that you get by believing the thing are related to the truth of the thing and only obtain if the thing is true. So that's like slightly different from the Wittgenstein case. Also, when we're talking about violating norms, I think it's, I actually do think we have a psychological tendency to stick with beliefs we already have. We have a kind of conservatism built in. And so I take that to be, I take what I'm doing here to be somewhat of an explanation of that. So like methodologically, I think I'm like very interested in all these psychological tendencies we tend to have that get called irrational all the time. I think humans are a little better than we think. Maybe not all the way better, but like I think a lot of the things that just get called irrational actually might have some rational bases. And that's what I want to say about our tendency to sort of have a kind of a bias towards a belief we already have. I think that's importantly different from adopting a new belief. So notice, like your example involved like, well, I guess you did say stick with the belief, but think about two kinds of examples. One is like, if you adopt this belief, X, Y, Z. The other is if you stick with this belief, XYZ. I'm pretty convinced that we are not able to adopt beliefs for certain kind of reasons, but it's like easier to stick with beliefs we already have, and that kind of fits a psychological tendency that we have.
Sahaj?
Well, thank you so much for the amazing talk. You gave me a brilliant solution to a lot of things that I'm thinking about, but particularly for our project. So like the question I'm asking is for self-interested reasons. I'm not trying to challenge anything, not that you won't be open to it, but challenge anything about your talk. So what I'm interested in is when we interpersonally hold each other accountable for having faith or not having faith, or challenge each other for not having faith. And my question is about like the source of normativity for that kind of interpersonal accountability. That like you ought to have faith in X. And like the way that you portrayed it is like, okay, it's like based on your individual commitment and your projects or whatnot. But when it comes to that kind of like you ought to have hope, for instance, or have faith, which I feel like kind of go together, it's like, no, like in virtue of the situation, doesn't matter what's your commitment, doesn't matter what your personal projects, you ought to have faith that X is true or whatever. And if you can help me see where normativity...
Good, good, okay. That's a great question. I might not be able to fully answer it, but I really like the question, because you're right. We do say like, yeah, you should have faith about this. I mean, in the religious context, it's like an attitude that sometimes it's like really morally important to have. It's like and sort of up to you in a certain sense. So so what's going on? I guess the argument about rationality was that it is rational to adopt commitments and stick with them. So that means there's some normativity there. If you have a certain kind of values or engage in a certain kind of project and you've had certain kind of evidence, then you ought to adopt faith commitments. Because to not do that would be to like, I don't know, care overly much about being wrong or overweigh the risks of being wrong rather than the benefits of being right. So I wonder if some of those kinds of statements could be like, are they similar to like, look, don't be spineless. It's like time to like put your stake out and not keep dithering. That would fit with my account. Like if a person said, you're like worried, like your spouse, like don't go out to dinner because what if you meet somebody and like, I think your spouse can say, look, you got to have faith in me. And that's a criticism of you. It seems like a criticism that you're like not correctly responding to the evidence, that you're leaving open something that you really should have closed. So if our complaints against somebody not having faith are of that flavor, it's like, you got to not dither here, you got to stake your claim, you have enough evidence, the time to search has passed, then that really fits with my account. I mean, I wonder if there's some other kind of complaint that's in the neighborhood that I haven't yet explained. I'd be interested, if you have something in mind, I'd be very interested to hear it.
I do, but I don't want to, maybe, should I ask or should I let other people ask questions?
Why don't you ask briefly, and then, if it's a long thing, we can talk about it afterwards.
So I feel like it's easy to like expand your view to like interpersonal things, but it's much harder when it comes to like political identities.
Interesting.
And like the claim that you ought to have faith in X and you ought not to switch. Maybe over dinner or a drink, I'll like tell you what exactly I am thinking. But like when you expand it, it's like independent of people's evidence. Like regardless of what are your commitments, what are your beliefs, you still ought to have, like it's like an independent thing.
I do want to talk about that further. One quick thought I have is that I wonder if sometimes those injunctions are more like saying this thing is true. So just like there might be 2 reasons I try to convince you to buy a stock. I might be like, this stock's going up. You should buy it. That's an evidence-independent reason. I'm telling you to buy the stock because of some fact in the world. Or I might say look at what it's done in the last quarter and buy this stock. And those sound like the same claim, but they're actually, one is the sort of objective odd and one is the subjective odd. And I just wonder if maybe in the political context, the objective odd is used a lot. It's like, look, here's a guy you ought to commit to because he's trustworthy or something, which is slightly different than the question of given your evidence, what should I have faith in? But I'm interested to talk more, so thank you for bringing it up.
Next, we have back there.
Hi.
For being here. I really appreciated a lot of the points that you brought up. And I agree with you to an extent that commitment is easier and or more fulfilling than being uncommitted. But if you would entertain a counterfactual, let's say in this world, everyone is able to overcome basic human nature and we have 8 billion uncommitted people. Wouldn't we then more quickly gravitate toward and aggregate around those claims that are actually true? Isn't faith or commitment to a belief something that prevents us from actually realizing the truth at a faster pace? And how does that play into the increasingly polarized nature of discourse, especially in this country?
That's a great question and a very apt one in this day and age. So I'm not going to be able to fully answer it, but one thing that I think is really important, and actually this comes from the philosophy of science literature, often people who are very stubbornly interested in a question end up gathering more evidence for all of us. So in all these scientific cases that Kuhn talks about, moving from phlogiston theory to oxygen theory, or moving from the idea that Uranus is a star to the idea that it's a planet, the people who first made these moves were being dogmatically irrational given the evidence they had. So at least that's Kuhn's view of the situation, and I think he's probably right that because look, here's this whole theory that's really well worked out. We know how phlogiston behaves, and here's this guy who's no, there's this thing called oxygen, and we haven't done any experiment. We don't even have the kinds of tools that could do experiments to figure out about oxygen. And so one thought, and I share this thought, is that actually the fact that many people are committed to different things is going to get us more evidence than we would otherwise. So think about in philosophy, we have these super committed utilitarians, we have these super committed virtue ethicists. If we were all sort of together in being I don't know which theory is true, let's work on them all together, we probably wouldn't know what to do if utilitarianism is true. But the fact that there are people that devote their life to it, that's good for all of us. Now, having said that, it's also part of my story that people should, while being dogmatically committed to their beliefs sometimes, also recognize that the evidence, objectively speaking, implies, if we didn't already have commitments, that we should be very agnostic towards what's true. And I think there may be important political things to do with that fact. So let's make the 8 billion people committed, but also realize that they're in a no better evidential position than people with different commitments. That seems like that's going to be pretty good. And that's what I think of as the best case. So maybe worry we're now in the case in which everybody's committed, but also thinks the other guys are stupid or something like that. That's not the case that I'm arguing for.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is a request for
Sure.
clarification on your remark in response to an earlier question about when you said that you thought that belief was based in faith rather than faith being based in belief. Now, I'm wondering whether we really need to distinguish faith from belief. We have these different words, and we use faith in Christian context and so forth. Now, in ancient Hebrew, there are not two words, one for faith and one for belief. To believe, which is actually the same root is cognate to the word for truth. So to hold something true, have faith in it. To believe a person, have faith in them. All the same single lexical thing in ancient Hebrew. Now, perhaps, if you want to keep belief and faith apart, maybe some complicated mutual basing would be needed, but maybe they're just the same thing. And then the other thing we could call credence, since we now have that word, and that's what tracks evidence, but is not online for action.
Great, yeah, thank you. This comes up, I mean, the way different languages treat this is very interesting. In some cases, in many languages, there's just one word. In some cases, I think it takes different prepositions. So like belief into is a kind of versus belief that. One important problem is that the sort of modern philosophical notion of belief maybe doesn't appear anywhere historically, or it's not as central to historical theorizing as it is for epistemologists nowadays. Knowledge, as you maybe were sort of gesturing at, is like a much more central concept. So one thing, if you like the more classical story about belief, or that belief in the sort of modern day philosopher's sense was like not present, then maybe the way you should take my picture is to say, there's this thing that maybe we could be referring to by the Hebrew words or whatever. That thing's faith. Faith has these properties of, it has some of the same properties as knowledge, namely it's truth-directed, and it's something on which people base their actions and their trust of other people, and it's sort of stable. Epistemologists have invented this other thing, belief, that's like a thinner notion. It's something that you have when you're not sure what's true. And I guess what I would be saying on that idea is that faith, namely this more robust commitment to something, even when you don't have knowledge, that attitude can be rational, even if your evidence doesn't amount to knowledge, while maintaining this other sort of epistemologist concept of belief at the same time. Does that help? Yes. Maybe. Okay. Thank you so much. That's a great question.
Allison?
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. That was great. This is probably a fairly minor question, but it actually comes in right at the beginning when you're restricting which claims you view as candidates for faith, where what I'm most curious about is the claim of wanting the claim to hold. So what I'm imagining is something along the lines of, let's say I've collected enough evidence. I think it's pretty important that I choose a meta theory or moral theory of some sort to stick with, and I have faith in deontology of some kind. Let's say I'm a straightforward Kantian. That said,
You're like sad that it's not consequentialism?
I'm not even sad it's not consequentialism. There's just a lot of conclusions I don't like. Maybe I really want to lie. Maybe I really want to do all these things that are impermissible. I don't want it to be true, but I have faith that it is, and it seems like I should act on it. Is want here playing a function more of, I think it is morally just that, or I think it is a good thing if the claim is true, not a matter of subjective desire?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think it's a small question. I think I've actually toyed with different ways of spelling out this idea of wanting the claim to hold. Like, one way in which I sometimes spell it out is like having a positive attitude towards it. but I'm not quite sure that that gets it right either. There's something where it's like you're pro deontology. I mean, maybe you just want to be right, or you.
I think it's an unfortunate truth.
It's an unfortunate truth. Well,
but I think it's an intrinsic.
Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't sound right to me. But like, if I don't think I have faith that nihilism is true. Even if I'm like, I don't want that to be true. I've come to the unfortunate conclusion that it is. That doesn't, to me, seem like a felicitous use of faith. Does that sound right to you?
I mean, I agree. It doesn't sound like the ordinary language usage of it, but it seems like it would still hold by some sort of similar. The mechanisms and form of everything you've said here would still seem to apply to it. So I'm wondering if this is just a linguistic distinction that makes us feel icky to say faith, but Yeah,
I mean, that's a good question. Maybe this isn't quite the right way to carve up the cases. I still want to resist the idea that like I have faith that you'll continue vaping or something. Like, there are things that I pretty convinced are true, and like maybe even would take bets on them and would stick with them even if I got evidence to the contrary.
I think it's particularly in the moral system case,
in the
where
moral
it seems
system
like
case.
it is relevant to how I act, whether or not I have faith in this.
Interesting.
Versus in the vaping case, it's something more like,
interesting. You might also think that things like positivity and wanting it to be true are downstream of your moral theory. So it might be like, I don't know, maybe if you're in one kind of moral theory, you don't want that one to be, it's like an important consequence of that moral theory that it'd be much better if it was false or something like that. So it like couldn't meet this condition by definition. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think about that a little more. I think you're onto something. I think I haven't quite carved up the terrain. I think I haven't quite carved this up in the right way. I mean, somebody could just say like, that condition isn't a precondition for faith at all. All you need is being uncertain about whether something holds on the basis of the evidence alone. You can perfectly well have faith that somebody will continue vaping. It's infelicitous for other reasons, like you shouldn't say that to somebody, that's like super rude or whatever. Or it's like sad to acknowledge that, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, maybe, I guess that condition, while I do like tentatively think it's true, it sort of lifts out from the rest of the account. So if that's the thing you're worried about, I think you could just X that one out. And
I think you might be able to get more cases that you could actually explain with this. So it's
that's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for bringing up the point. Every time someone says, I think this is a small point, it's like a big point. That's like a truth about philosophy.
Allison, two to your right.
Oh, another small point that I think I may have just. I may have misheard you, but it seems that you're thinking that we're assessing beliefs in terms of things. But I wonder why not just think about like our investigative practices, because to those, even if we're thinking of maintaining a belief rather than adopting a new one, it still seems that that's not up to me. What I do, it's really not up to me. I can't choose to maintain a belief if I wanted to. Whereas I could choose to not listen to an objection to text while someone's objecting to an account, or I could choose to not pay attention to something, or I could choose to not investigate. So anyways, it just seems to me that might be, yeah.
Good, yeah, that's a really good question too. Also not a small question. So I guess I haven't said exactly in what sense you're going to live out your faith, so to speak. So you're like going to be aiming to have faith if you're aiming to, in fact, keep your beliefs when counter evidence arises. I do think, as I mentioned in response to another question, that we have some psychological mechanisms that make this possible and pretty normal. But you also might think, I want to have faith, but I'm weak-willed in certain ways. Maybe rational ones, maybe irrational ones. So maybe I want to have faith that I'll pass the test, but when the test is in front of me, I'm just like, I get so nervous. Maybe I know that I'm going to drop my faith because I'm nervous. Maybe I know that I'm going to have trouble following through on my faith, as you said, because it's hard for me to not let my belief go with the evidence, then I think, yeah, it makes sense that given that I'm committed to having faith or trying to have faith, that I take these other actions that will shore up my faith. I mean, maybe in the religious case, it's notable that one thing that's done in lots of religious services across different religious traditions is having a thing where the people state their beliefs together. Like, I believe in this thing. Maybe that's a kind of way to shore them up. It doesn't have the function, obviously, of like producing more evidence. We're just like saying this thing. And maybe it has the function of making them more resilient or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. This is maybe a little bit related, but and maybe also a narrow question. I was interested in the second condition. So commitment is required if counter evidence won't be conclusive. And the two ways came to mind for me of reading that. One is a sort of attitude you might have, or psychologically you just probably won't, in fact, change your mind.
Yeah.
And then the other one is you have some sort of antecedent knowledge of the type of evidence you are likely to receive. I take it was closer to the latter thing, but it seems weird to say, so, you know already.
Yeah. So it's closer to the latter thing, but not in terms of knowledge. So this is like, I didn't give you the background formal model here, but like normally you just sort of like assign probabilities to a bunch of propositions. Like, probability, my friend will keep my secret, 0.9. But then you also assign probability to a bunch of, you assign conditional probabilities to a bunch of pair of propositions. So probability that my friend will keep my secret conditional on our mutual friend saying they're a gossip. So condition 2 specifically says that conditional probability is not super low. The super low here is a little vague because it actually depends on the stakes, but like maybe in some kind of case it'd be like, oh yeah, like so if it's below 0.7, you're not gonna tell your secret to your friend. If it's below 0.3, then it's so conclusive that you ought not to have faith. And so then the thought would be that before I'm approached by the mutual friend, I have a view about how I ought to update if this evidence comes in. So my current 0.9 that my friend will keep my secret is sort of based on if this other guy says they will, that probability would go up to 0.95. If it says they won't, it would go down. And I think they're gonna say certain things with various likelihoods. So it's all sort of like a static picture about how you'll respond to evidence. That's like the standard picture that gets called Bayesianism in philosophy. It's maybe a little crude in certain ways, but that's the sort of idea. It's like subjectively from your perspective, you think this is how you ought to update, and you think this is a possibility. Thank you.
So I will make no claims about how big or small my question is. I'll leave that to everybody else here. So it's kind of a setup and then an actual question, which I think is a kind of a friendly amendment. So I take it as a matter of faith that you're not trying to resuscitate Pascal's wager.
Correct.
Which is the earliest example of Bayesian decision making. He didn't call it that. Bayes wasn't.
But he invented it.
But he invented
call what he
it.
wanted.
So I take it you're not doing that. You're not doing that.
Correct.
Largely because of Victor's reason. We choose practically. We commit ourselves to a course of actions. We cannot, in any normal sense, choose to believe something.
Mm-hmm.
Set things up so that indirectly. So I take it you're not just bringing.
Yeah.
Okay. So then. In the question and answer, you've been circling around psychology, attitudes, disposition. Let me offer a friendly amendment that what you're talking about practical rationality and epistemic rationality. And belief should be governed by epistemic rationality, and commitment should be governed by practical rationality. And of course, we shouldn't be so crude as to think that we should engage in Bayesian updating moment by moment, because we have good practical reasons to not do that.
Yeah.
faith is about dispositional rationality or rationality of attitude. So there's a missing category here, or a suppressed category that you're really talking about, but you haven't elevated it. And what defends your entire view against the standard, many centuries old criticism of Pascal is that you're not engaging in this claim that it's somehow rational to choose to believe something despite the mounting evidence against it, but that it's rational to choose a disposition or an attitude. It's not motivated irrationality to engage in this kind of psychology, but it's actually rational to have the psychology that acts as if, and there's a Kantian point here, right? You act as if certain beliefs are true, even though you can't, as a matter of epistemic rationality, hold that they are true. That is a kind of inconsistency and maybe a motivated irrationality. But you act as if they are true because acting as if they are true allows you to keep your commitment to a practical course of action, a set of intentions, which we have really, really good reasons to have stability and reliability about our practical commitments. So faith is a matter of attitude, and you're making an argument that our attitudes or dispositions have rationality conditions, and under certain circumstances, those conditions are met.
Great.
So I mean that as a friendly.
Yeah. I really like thinking in terms of it's rational to have this disposition. One slight amendment I'd make. So I agree with when we're talking about. I agreed with what you said in the practical case. It's rational to act as if this thing is true, and it's good to have a disposition. It's good to have a disposition not to change your course at a moment's notice. I think and maybe we can even think of that as a kind of virtue, which is nice because people like to think of faith as a virtue, and virtues are maybe dispositions to do certain things. The one thing in the case of belief, I do actually think something stronger. I had two parts of my talk. There's the faith as action, and then there's application to belief. I did want to make the stronger argument that you can actually believe the things even as your evidence wanes. But taking your amendment, maybe I could say, so everything you said for action and the case of belief, I think is also rational to have your disposition not to revise your beliefs too frequently or something like that. So yeah, I really like that, especially the connection to the question of why is faith a virtue, and it's got to be something that's virtue-like, like a disposition in order to be a virtue. So thank you so much.
My fears were true. Everyone had a question, and they were not all asked, but I would like to join
everyone. Did you
everyone.
have faith in that? Did you have faith that everyone would have a question?
I have faith that all questions will be answered at the faculty club, where we'll have a reception and to which you're all invited. So, but in the meantime, I want to thank Professor Buchak for an incredible lecture.
Thank you guys.